Good morning to everybody. How you doing? Hope all's well. Keep up the beautiful work. Besorot Tobot, Yeshua V'Nehamot. Today is Wednesday. Parashat Ba'alecha. It's a sunny day. That's it. It's starting to get heat wave-ish, but just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, it's going to be cold again in a few days. Hashem is the boss, and everyone else is the sauce, as they say. And whatever he brings, it should be with beracha and good things always. Today's class is dedicated to Am Yisrael and the hostages and the soldiers and Shalom be Yisrael. There's a big mess out there, but Mashiach could fix it. Be'ezrat Hashem in 1 second, and He's going to come closer in merit of all of you. Yishtabach Shemo La'ad. So we're going back to the laws of Shabbat Kodesh, and we were doing the 39 melachot, and we are up to the melacha of tahine, tochen, to grind. Of course, the word tahine came from the word tohen, grinding, because that's how you make tahine. You grind the sesame seeds. If someone grinds on Shabbat wheat or barley or spices or the like, it is a sin from the Torah. Believe it or not, when somebody does it with a grinder, with a little mill, a big mill, etc., a machine that's made for grinding, it is prohibited. And even, believe it or not, it's prohibited from the Torah. So it's a serious thing. And even cutting vegetables, making them teeny for all those Israeli salad customers out there, which they call salata. That's in a lot of houses. It's the man's job to cut the Israeli salad, or at least he tells someone to do it for him. They cut the cucumbers tiny. They cut the tomatoes tiny. The ekche tiny. Has halila v'has. And are you allowed to do that on Shabbat? And believe it or not, it's a tolda. A tolda is a branch off of the melacha. We have the av melacha of grinding with a machteshet, with a grinder, and then you have also, as mentioned, cutting vegetables very tiny is a branch of the Av Melacha Toleda, and it's prohibited from the Torah. However, if someone does cut the salad very teeny weeny, because that's like grinding. What is grinding? You have a spice and you put it in a grinder and you take it, turn it into a powder. So that is now what grinding is, making it from big to small with a machine. However, someone might think cutting vegetables is not a problem, but it's the same item. It's a tolda because you're not using it in a machine, but you're cutting it tiny with a knife. The only difference is you're allowed to cut vegetables teeny weeny if you're doing it to eat right away. We know there's a difference in many halachot on Shabbat if you're doing it for later or you're doing it for right away. If you're doing it for the seudah, for the meal that's right next to you, then you're allowed to do certain things in borer, you're allowed to do certain things in preparation, and you're also allowed to do certain things when it comes to tochen, when it comes to cutting the vegetables teeny in order to make a salad or something similar. But you're not allowed to cut the vegetables in a machine that's used for cutting. If someone has one of these machines or even a grater of some type that they want to cut the cucumbers and tomatoes to make it small, you're not allowed to use that on Shabbat. But to cut the vegetables on a cutting board with a knife safely, you're allowed to do it tiny only if you're going to have it l'altar right away for the meal that's ahead of us. Now, that could mean if the day is long, the meal ahead of us, somebody might say, I'll start preparing at 1 o'clock for the meal we're going to have at 8 o'clock for a seudah shlishit. Sometimes ladies have a bunch of friends coming over for a seudah shlishit, or sometimes they might have tehillim reading in the home, so they need seudah shlishit. So someone might say, that's for the meal ahead of me. So the answer is, when we say la'altar, that it's for the upcoming meal, it's a half hour before the meal. Otherwise, more than that, you're not allowed to cut the vegetables teeny, believe it or not, because it's in a tolda of tochen, which is the av melacha. Now, not that any of us are really doing this on Shabbat, but if it would be that someone needed sawdust for whatever reason it is, they want to absorb oil dripping or something, whatever it might be, even something like that, because wood grows and metal comes from the earth, even though it doesn't grow. But if someone would need, for some reason, I don't think we're going to have a reason for that, but if someone shaves off metal, now, if you're sanding the wood for the actual wood that's there, not for the sawdust, so that would be a different sin on Shabbat, which we'll talk about. But for under the umbrella of being considered grinding, if you don't need the sawdust or the metal powder that might come off, then you're if you don't need it, it's not tochen. But if you do need it, it's also a prohibition of tochen. Hamadia brings down what's the law with a little house on the prairie grinder or mill that's a water mill. You have the wheel in the river going like this, spinning, and then there's a mill attached. Is that what we would call cause and effect? What we call a girama? Or is it considered literally someone putting wheat in there and they're grinding it on Shabbat? So Hamadia brings two opinions. Some say it's only prohibited midirabanan, and some say it is from the Torah, which means also if somebody wants to make coffee on Shabbat. Now, obviously, we know you can never brew coffee on Shabbat, and if the beans are already roasted, there's an additional prohibition if somebody wants to grind them. Now, some people have Turkish coffee Saturday morning, which is already roasted, and now you just add hot water, no problem. Of course, old school Fanjan style, obviously, is 1,000,000% prohibited on Shabbat. But let's say someone wants to grind. They bought fresh Turkish coffee beans and now they want to grind it on Shabbat. They have a little, not electric, a little grinder that they have. It's a sin from the Torah to do that as well on Shabbat, believe it or not. Now they have coffee machines that have the grinder as part of the brewing. You keep the beans in there, and then the timer goes on, and it starts to grind the beans, and then it just starts to brew the coffee. That's pretty fresh. And are you allowed to do that? Obviously, you can't do it on Shabbat. We don't even have to say that. But are you allowed to put the timer in and let it happen? So even though we hold the timer is allowed for everything, lights and sprinklers, etc. But when it comes to cooking, it's a little more strict. And at the end of the day, ask your local rabbi. But Hamadia said, if very necessary, technically that would be allowed, even a brewing with a timer on Shabbat. But for specifics, like we said, ask your local rabbi. Now we know some people have a peppercorn grinder in the house. They want fresh pepper on their food that they're eating on Shabbat, the Oneg Shabbat, Lichvot Shabbat Kodesh. Are you allowed to use one of those hand grinders for peppercorns on Shabbat? And the answer is 1,000,000% no, it's prohibited. You cannot use a grinder for pepper on Shabbat. Even salt that the rabbi says, which is ground beforehand, and it maybe got stuck or something like that, you're not allowed to grind salt as well on Shabbat in a grinder. That's what the rabbi teaches us. If you do want to get fresh pepper or heke, you have big chunks of Himalayan salt. That's the new salt of the generation. Or how do you grind it if you need it on Shabbat? So you're not allowed to use one of those hand grinders. The answer is you take an item like the back of a knife and you sit there banging it in like a plate or a bowl or something of the like. But you cannot even do it technically on a cutting board or especially using the grinder, even though you're not really grinding, but you're using the back of the knife, you can't do it. So that would be the two conditions you need for salt and for pepper. If you want to grind it on Shabbat, you're not really grinding, you're crushing, right? And with the back of a knife or something of the like, you are allowed to. Now, there's a rule in halacha En tahina ahar tahina. It's not considered grinding if it's already something that's ground. And therefore, if you have salt that became clumpy, or sugar that became clumpy, or if there's still men in shul, I don't know if they have it anymore. I think that ship has sailed, but on Yom Kippur, there are still people that keep the tradition. They had the old men giving out shelemah in the old days, snuff on Shabbat. Are you allowed to grind it if there's a little couple of clumps? So, of course, for health purposes, ask your local doctor, etc. But for now, we're talking halacha. Are you allowed to crush those clumps of snuff in an item, or sugar, or salt? And the answer is yes. But even the rabbi tells us, even salt that was already ground and now became clumpy should not be used in a grinder. And that we spoke about in the laws of Borer. In the old days, they used to put pieces of rice inside of the salt shaker to absorb the moisture. This way, the salt doesn't become clumpy. Are you allowed to use that salt shaker on Shabbat? Because it's technically borer. You're separating the salt from the rice, and you're using a technically a sifter, which are the holes in the top of the salt shaker. But at the end of the day, Rabino Grande, he tells us you are allowed to use a salt shaker like that as well. If someone gets mud on their suit, God forbid, or something of the like, and it gets hard and dries, is it considered grinding if you get rid of it? And the answer is no. But over there, there's another problem. We know you're not allowed to do laundry on Shabbat. Someone has a stain, you're not allowed to clean it on Shabbat. Now, there is a halacha, believe it or not. Nowadays, they're making the stretchy material suits. If someone's suit is all rayon and polyester and all of the above, where there's no real wool, cotton, or linen, and you get something on there, you're allowed to clean it off on Shabbat because it's not a real garment. It's like a plastic tablecloth. Are you allowed to use Windex with a tissue, with a napkin, and wipe the plastic tablecloth? The answer is yes. Why? Because not considered a garment. So the same thing over here on one of those suits. But otherwise, if someone does have mud on their suit, so the rabbis tell us, don't, even though technically there's an tahina, har tahina, it's not considered grinding after grinding. However, you shouldn't do it on the outside of the garment to rub it and make it into crumbs and take it off, but rather do it from the inside of the garment. Put your hands and then rub the material on the material. This way, it could grind. It's not a problem of grinding, since mud was really dirt, and dirt is already particles, and therefore it only became clumpy when it became wet. But once it dries, it's not considered tahina. But we don't want it to look like you're doing laundry on Shabbat. So most definitely in that situation, a person should be careful as well. What's the law with a banana for the children, or someone, an older person who can't eat? You want to mush the food. Or a lot of people have that a style. I think it's already dying out, but the style of eating avocado toast. You get yourself a slice of bread, you toast it on the block. Can you do that? The answer is yes. The Ashkenaz hold you're not allowed to turn bread into toast on Shabbat. Sephardic say Hamavadia holds there's no problem of mitaken mana when it comes to making toast on Shabbat. But of course, for specifics, says the local rabbi. But even if you want to take a piece of Melba toast or a Triscuit and you want to take avocado, so you mush it and you put it on there. So is that a problem? You're allowed to do it not with any utensil. You're allowed to do it with a fork, mushing style. That's allowed. But the rabbi tells us you're only allowed to do it if you're going to eat it right away as well. If someone wants to make avocado guacamole for Seudat Shilishi a while before, you're not allowed to. But to do it for right before the meal, just like mentioned above, then you are allowed to a half hour before the meal. Now, if the mother, God bless, doesn't eat, but she's doing it for others in the meal, still it's considered that you are allowed to do these kind of items, cutting the salad small, as mentioned, and mushing the avocado or the banana or the dates or whatever it might be to make it into a puree. But otherwise, with any utensil made for these items, then you're not allowed to do it. Now, there's another halacha called memareach, which we will get to Bezrat Hashem. For example, a person can't use chapstick on Shabbat. It's a thing of smearing. It's a memahek as well. Certain creams that a person might have, if they're very thick, which we'll get to with details, you can't smear on Shabbat. So now, is there a problem of smearing your avocado on your toast, on your Melba toast, or whatever it is on Shabbat? I remember sometimes kids like peanut butter on chicken, believe it or not. Is it a problem to smear on the eccles? And the answer is there's no prohibition of memareach, of smearing, when it comes to food, which we'll get to Bezat Hashem when we get closer to that halacha. What's the law now? If we said there's no problem of grating something that was ever already grated or grinding something that was grinded, right? Cheese is not something that grows from the ground. So cheese might not have a problem to cut teeny pieces on Shabbat with a knife, even for later on, technically. However, with a cheese grater, you're not, the rabbi tells us not to use it on Shabbat. Some people like to throw cheese in the salad. You made yourself a Greek salad Saturday morning, and you want to take the feta cheese and use the cheese grater on Shabbat. Are you allowed to? Technically, someone would say, but that's not grinding because it's not something that grew. It was once milk before, it turned into cheese. But the rabbi says, since that's made for grating, you cannot use that machine on Shabbat, the cheese grater. You could only cut it with a knife. So that's something people should take into consideration as well. We'll stop here for today. I hope everyone has the greatest day. Keep up the excellent work. Kol hakavod, b'sorot tovot, yeshuot v'nehamot.